I am Caucasian. I am male. I grew up in the Denver metro area. And I paint fantasy miniatures as a hobby. Each of these and more help make me a unique individual, and each are ways that I can be categorized, compared and contrasted to others. Let's dig in deeper.
Let's get into categories. To recap our last theme of the glossary, we didn't go over every term related to equity and instead discussed how to approach the words we do come across. We know that words are flexible, have limits, and evolve over time. Therefore, we're better served with seeking to understand rather than memorize words. With this knowledge in mind, we can better approach the idea of categories. I want to emphasize one more time that we are all individuals and each of us can be categorized. This is not a contradiction. We define ourselves as both all the time. Sometimes we do assert our individuality, other times we assert our group memberships, whether as a member of an organization, a citizen of a country, a fan of a sports team, so on and so forth. It depends on the situation and what matters to us in the moment. When it comes to equity, the categories we discuss often cover demographics. Race, ethnicity, sex, gender, age, disability status, religion, the list goes on. We focus on demographics because we know time and time again there are disparities across them that aren't justifiable. We measure it to see where and how we can do better. We use the term categories and go broader than demographics because there are cases where it makes sense to use other ways to group us. For example, an internal organizational equity question may be the impacts of remote and hybrid work. We may categorize employees by whether they're office or field staff, by supervisory status, or department. For an external equity question, we can look at houses and businesses via floodplain and people's proximity to risk regardless of their background. Our categories push and pull us in different directions. We're often influenced by external forces based on our categories. Sometimes this is explicit, other times it's much more subtle. Where do we start? With so many different ways we can categorize ourselves, how do we even know where to begin? The first, and in my opinion, most important lesson at this point is that we have to start somewhere. It may be a tough choice to figure out the most appropriate, relevant way to categorize our communities for any given initiative or project, and we still need to do it if we're going to compare and contrast and see how well we're doing for different groups. A good starting point to consider is impact and opportunity. By impact, I mean which groups do we feel are getting the shortest end of the stick? Which groups are most in need? By opportunity, I mean which groups do we already have some connections with, some trust built, may face less resistance when we try to serve them. For those of our organizations more enthusiastic about equity, maybe further along the journey, there can be more weight given to impact. For places that are struggling to promote the importance of this work, opportunity may need to come first. Either way, the Guidebook offers a good initial list to consider the pros and cons with both the federal and state of Colorado protected classes. I want to also take a moment to address one common idea by many leaders in equity to go race first or race forward. They make strong arguments that race has been and continues to be the deepest divide in many ways. There is very little public awareness of how race even came about and what it even is, and discussions of race, racism, and inequities about race hit raw on so many people. If we can figure out how to do better on race, they say, we can figure out anything. Now, whether this applies to your work is your judgment call to make. I trust you on it. Regardless of where we choose to start, some people will rightfully be impatient and assert themselves. They will ask us why we've left out other groups. This is all right. The best approach I found is with yes and. Yes, this group is also very important and we will get there. And we had to make the hard call on where to start and landed where we did for X, Y, and Z reasons. Missteps. We all make them once in a while. Here are a few of the common ones when broaching the topic of categories. First off is decision paralysis. As I said, it is a hard choice where to begin. No choice, however, means that no one's getting the extra thought or consideration they could use. I know we want to help everyone all at once, We can only get there by working at it a few categories, a few groups at a time, whatever our current resources and bandwidth allows. There's also this pesky, annoying thought that we have to be perfect with equity. We can't get it wrong. Bollocks. The whole point is we're already doing it wrong. We'll trip and stumble as we try to do better, and we'll get to a better place through hard work and learned experience. There's also a common misstep of being defensive. Sometimes we feel the urge to defend our organization or profession and downplay or deny its failings. Sometimes we're defending our sense of self. I am a good person. I treat people fairly. We need the humility, the vulnerability to admit where we can be better. Also, when trying to serve a new community, we fall into the trap of only including the people who belong to said group. We need allies, if for no other reason than if a group is underserved, then it means they're not integrated into our processes yet, or our systems, and they're not in the room when decisions are being made. We need allies to bridge the gap, to amplify their voices. Focusing on one demographic group or another isn't about a temporary effort in which we'll eventually cross the finish line. It's about figuring out how to be aware of them, serve them, and meet their needs in our normal day-to-day operations, to integrate equity for them as a second nature, and then rinse and repeat as we find more groups to better understand and therefore serve. Finally, we have to do the homework. As I've said, the series is a general discussion of equity. When we figure out what category or categories to start with, additional work is needed. Like anything else, put the effort in first. Our first example in the guidebook of a local government doing the good work is the city of Louisville. Using a program called AudioEye, they made their website far more accessible, and they did so before any mandates were issued, ensuring they were ahead of the game. In this case, the category they considered were groups with different reading and visual needs, and they took steps to ensure that more people can access information and services online. Props to Louisville. For the optional exercise, we can start dabbling into data. Unfortunately, robust data on equity is not readily available for most local jurisdictions. Filling this gap can be a heavy lift. For now, try to find one source available, maybe an internal employee survey or the U.S. Census. Pick out some information and consider the real-life implications of said data. And if we want to take it a step further, there's intersectionality. After all, categories are not simple A and B options. They run more complex. Intersectionality, first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, is a metaphor that creates a visual of a literal road intersection, of what happens when two or more different demographics meet up. In her case, it was the unique experiences of Black women, facing prejudice and having perspectives that neither Black men nor white women experienced. And that's our brief introductory on categories. Trust me when I say I wanted to include more, but being mindful of time, this I felt were the essentials. Up next, we'll wrap up the introduction section with the critical lens.